Welcome back and thank you tuning into Reddit cheating stories. We appreciate every single one of you. Let's dive in. I was born into a family that never saw me as enough. My older sister, Rachel, was the shining star, the golden child who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. From the moment I could understand favoritism, I realized I was living in her shadow. No matter what I did, it was always second best compared to her achievements. Rachel was beautiful, intelligent, and charming. She was the valedictorian of her high school, a talented musician, and the apple of my parents' eyes. Meanwhile, I struggled to gain even an ounce of the recognition she received effortlessly. When I brought home an A, my parents barely acknowledged it. But if Rachel got an A-, there was an uproar in the house, with my parents scrambling to comfort her, insisting she was still perfect. I remember one particular instance when I was in elementary school. I had worked tirelessly on a science project, spending hours researching and building an intricate model. When I presented it to my parents, they barely looked at it, their attention focused on Rachel's latest piano recital. I felt a pang of disappointment and frustration, wondering why my efforts were never good enough. As I grew older, the comparisons only intensified. My parents would constantly remark on how Rachel was excelling in college, while I was struggling to find my footing. They would attend all of Rachel's events, beaming with pride, while I was left to navigate my own accomplishments alone. Birthdays and holidays were particularly painful. Rachel got extravagant gifts, jewelry, expensive trips, designer clothes, while I was lucky to receive a book or a sweater. It wasn't just material things either. It was the way they spoke about her, the way they boasted about her achievements to friends and family, while I was barely a footnote in their conversations. I grew up yearning for their approval, trying everything to win their love. I joined sports teams, took advanced classes, and even tried to mimic Rachel's hobbies, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they would see me too. But it never worked. The most painful part was when my mother told me, "You should be more like your sister." That was the day I stopped trying to seek their approval. Instead, I started focusing on myself. I worked hard, graduated with honors, and secured a well-paying job in tech. Yet, even with all my accomplishments, my parents still found a way to compare me to Rachel. "Rachel just got promoted again. Isn't that wonderful? You should call and congratulate her." They never once acknowledged my success. I began to realize that no matter how hard I tried, I would never be able to measure up to Rachel in my parents' eyes. It was a painful truth to accept, but it was also liberating. I no longer felt the need to seek their approval or compete with Rachel for their attention. But just when I thought I had finally found some peace, my parents dropped a bombshell. They decided to leave their entire inheritance to Rachel. They made it clear that she deserved it more because she had always made them proud. It wasn't even about the money, it was the blatant disregard for my existence that cut deep. That night, I cried, not for the money but for the years I wasted seeking their love. As I reflected on my life, I realized that I had been living in a state of emotional poverty for far too long. I had been so focused on trying to win my parents' approval that I had forgotten how to love and value myself. But that was about to change. I decided to take a stand and reclaim my life. I cut ties with my parents, knowing that it would be a difficult and painful process. I moved across the country, changed my number, and removed them from my life. It was a drastic measure, but it was necessary for my own survival. As I started my new life, I was met with a mix of emotions. There was sadness and grief, but also a sense of liberation and freedom. I was finally able to break free from the toxic dynamic that had defined my childhood and adolescence. I built a new life, one that was filled with loving and supportive relationships. I made friends who accepted me for who I was, without condition or expectation. I found a therapist who helped me work through my childhood trauma and develop a more positive self-image. As I looked back on my journey, I realized that I had been living in a state of emotional poverty for far too long. But by cutting ties and focusing on myself, I had finally found a sense of self-worth and liberation. Years later, I heard from a cousin that my parents were struggling financially. Rachel had squandered the inheritance, making reckless investments and living beyond her means. My parents, now elderly, were struggling to make ends meet. I had the power to help them. But I didn't. For the first time in my life, I was the one in control. And it felt good. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I was free. As I looked back on my journey, I realized that I had come a long way. I had learned to love and accept myself, flaws and all. I had built a life that was filled with purpose and meaning. But even as I celebrated my newfound freedom, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. I thought about all the years I had wasted trying to win my parents' approval. I thought about all the times I had felt invisible and unloved. As I reflected on my childhood, I realized that I had been living in a state of emotional survival. I had been constantly trying to prove myself, to earn my parents' love and approval. But it had been a futile effort. Now, as I looked back on those years, I saw them for what they were, a desperate attempt to fill a void that could never be filled. My parents had never been capable of giving me the love and approval I so desperately craved. But I had finally found it. I had found it in myself. As I stood in my cozy living room, surrounded by the people and things I loved, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that I would never again be held hostage by my parents' toxic behavior. I was free. And as I looked out at the world, I knew that I was ready for whatever came next. I was ready to live my life on my own terms, to pursue my passions and dreams. I was ready to be me. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence. It was my best friend, Sarah, with her 2 kids in tow. We spent the afternoon laughing and chatting, enjoying each other's company. As the day drew to a close, Sarah turned to me and said, "You know, I'm so proud of you. You've come so far, and you're an amazing person." I smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude and love. "Thanks, Sarah. That means a lot coming from you." As we hugged goodbye, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I was surrounded by people who loved and accepted me, and I was finally living the life I deserved. The phone rang, shrill in the silence. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should answer it. But something compelled me to pick up. "Hello," I said, my voice cautious. "Hi, it's Rachel," my sister said, her voice hesitant. I was wondering if we could talk. I felt a surge of emotions, anger, hurt, and betrayal. But as I looked around my cozy living room, filled with the people and things I loved, I knew that I was ready. "Okay," I said, my voice firm. "I'm listening." And with that, I began a new chapter in my life. A chapter filled with forgiveness, healing, and redemption. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the conversation that was about to unfold. Rachel and I hadn't spoken in years, not since I had cut ties with my parents and started my new life. "What do you want to talk about, Rachel?" I asked, my voice neutral. "I want to apologize," Rachel said, her voice hesitant. "I'm so sorry for the way I treated you growing up. I was so caught up in being the perfect daughter, I didn't realize the harm I was causing you." I felt a lump form in my throat as I processed Rachel's words. It was the first time she had ever acknowledged the pain she had caused me. "Why now, Rachel?" I asked, my voice softening. "Why are you apologizing now, after all these years?" "Because I've been doing some soul searching," Rachel said. "I realized that I was just as much a victim of Mom and Dad's toxic behavior as you were. I was so focused on pleasing them, I didn't realize the harm it was causing me, too." I felt a sense of surprise at Rachel's words. I had never thought about the fact that Rachel was also a victim of our parents' behavior. "I'm glad you're taking responsibility for your actions, Rachel," I said. "But I need time to process this. Can we talk more about this later?" "Of course," Rachel said. "I understand. I just wanted to reach out and apologize. I hope we can work towards healing and moving forward." I hung up the phone, feeling a mix of emotions. I was glad that Rachel was taking steps to make amends, but I was also wary. I had been hurt by my family for so long, I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive and move forward. As I sat in my living room, processing my emotions, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could continue to hold on to the past, to let the hurt and anger define me. Or I could choose to forgive, to let go of the past and move forward. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of resolve wash over me. I was ready to start the healing process, to work towards forgiveness and moving forward. The journey ahead of me wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. I was ready to face my past, to forgive my family, and to move forward into a brighter future. Over the next few weeks, Rachel and I talked several times, working towards healing and moving forward. It wasn't easy, but we were both committed to making things right. As we talked, I realized that Rachel was genuinely sorry for the way she had treated me. She had been just as much a victim of our parents' toxic behavior as I had, and she was working hard to make amends. I began to see Rachel in a new light, as a person who was flawed and imperfect, but who was also capable of growth and change. And as I saw her in this new light, I began to feel a sense of forgiveness wash over me. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But slowly, over time, I began to let go of the past, to forgive Rachel and my parents for the harm they had caused me. And as I forgave, I began to feel a sense of peace wash over me. I realized that I didn't have to be defined by my past, that I had the power to choose my own path, to create my own future. I was finally free. As the months went by, Rachel and I continued to work on our relationship. We would meet for coffee or lunch, and talk about our lives, our hopes, and our dreams. It was a slow and tentative process, but I could feel the distance between us slowly closing. One day, Rachel asked me if I would like to meet her family. She had gotten married a few years ago, and had 2 beautiful children. I was hesitant at first, but Rachel assured me that they were kind and loving people, and that they would welcome me with open arms. I agreed, and a few weeks later, I found myself standing outside Rachel's house, feeling nervous and unsure. Rachel answered the door, and smiled warmly at me. "Hey, sis," she said, giving me a hug. "I'm so glad you're here." I smiled back at her, feeling a sense of gratitude and love. We went inside, and I was introduced to Rachel's husband, John, and their 2 children, Emily and Jack. They were all warm and welcoming, and I felt like I was part of the family. As we sat down to dinner, I couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder and gratitude. I had never thought that I would be able to reconcile with Rachel, or that I would be able to find a sense of belonging and connection with her family. But as we talked and laughed together, I realized that family was not just about blood ties, but about the relationships we build and nurture over time. And I knew that I had found a new family, one that loved and accepted me for who I was. As the evening drew to a close, Rachel walked me to the door, and gave me a hug. "Thank you for coming," she said, smiling at me. "I'm so glad we're doing this, sis." I smiled back at her, feeling a sense of love and connection. "Me too, Rach," I said. "Me too." As I drove home, I felt a sense of peace and contentment wash over me. I knew that I still had a long way to go, that there would still be challenges and obstacles ahead. But I also knew that I was not alone, that I had found a new family, one that loved and accepted me for who I was. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt a sense of gratitude and wonder. I had thought that I would never be able to find a sense of belonging and connection, but I had been wrong. I had found a new family, one that loved and accepted me for who I was. And as I looked to the future, I knew that I would always be grateful for that. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity, as Rachel and I continued to work on our relationship. We would meet for coffee or lunch, and talk about our lives, our hopes, and our dreams. We would laugh and joke together, and I would feel like I was part of the family. As the months went by, I found myself feeling more and more at home with Rachel and her family. I would spend holidays with them, and attend family gatherings. I would help out with the kids, and feel like I was making a real contribution. And as I looked at Rachel, I would feel a sense of love and gratitude. I had thought that I would never be able to forgive her, that I would never be able to move past the pain and hurt of our childhood. But I had been wrong. Rachel had changed, and I had changed. We had both grown and learned, and we had both found a new appreciation for each other. And as I looked at her, I knew that I would always be grateful for that. One day, as we were sitting in the park, watching the kids play, Rachel turned to me and said, "You know, sis, I'm really glad we're doing this. I'm really glad we're rebuilding our relationship." I smiled at her, feeling a sense of love and connection. "Me too, Rach," I said. "Me too." And as we sat there, watching the kids play, I knew that I had finally found what I had been looking for all my life. I had finally found a sense of belonging and connection, a sense of family and love. And I knew that I would always be grateful for that. As I settled into my new life with Rachel's family, I began to feel a sense of purpose and belonging that I had never experienced before. I started helping out around the house, cooking meals and doing chores, and I even began to help John with his work, using my skills to assist him with his projects. But as I became more and more integrated into the family, I began to realize that there were still some unresolved issues between Rachel and me. We had never really talked about our past, about the pain and hurt that we had caused each other, and I knew that if we were going to move forward, we needed to confront those issues head-on. So, one day, I sat down with Rachel and said, "We need to talk." Rachel looked at me curiously, but she nodded and said, "Okay, what's up?" And so, we began to talk, really talk, about our past and our feelings. We talked about the pain and hurt that we had caused each other, and we talked about the love and loyalty that we shared as sisters. It was a difficult conversation, but it was also liberating, and as we talked, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. As we finished our conversation, Rachel turned to me and said, "I'm so glad we had this talk. I feel like we can finally move forward, together." And I nodded in agreement, feeling a sense of peace and closure that I had never felt before. But just as we were starting to feel like we were on the same page, a new challenge arose. Rachel's family was facing a financial crisis, and they were in danger of losing their home. John had lost his job, and Rachel's income wasn't enough to cover the mortgage payments. I knew that I had to do something to help, but I wasn't sure what. I didn't have any money to lend them, and I didn't know how to help them find a new source of income. But as I sat there, thinking about the problem, I had an idea. I remembered a skill that I had learned in my previous job, a skill that could potentially help John find a new job. And so, I turned to Rachel and said, "I think I might have an idea. Let me talk to John and see if we can come up with a plan." Rachel looked at me hopefully, and I could see the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. But I smiled and said, "Don't worry, sis. We'll figure this out together." And with that, I set to work, using my skills to help John find a new job and save their home. It was a challenging task, but I was determined to help, and I knew that with hard work and determination, we could overcome any obstacle. As I worked with John to help him find a new job, I realized that it wasn't going to be easy. The job market was tough, and John's skills were specialized. But I was determined to help, and I spent hours scouring the internet for job openings and networking with people in John's industry. Finally, after weeks of searching, we got a break. A company that John had applied to months ago called him in for an interview. John was nervous but hopeful, and I could sense his excitement as he prepared for the interview. The day of the interview arrived, and John left early in the morning, looking sharp and confident. I waited anxiously for him to return, my mind racing with possibilities. When John walked in the door, I could tell by the look on his face that something was wrong. "How did it go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. John shook his head. "It didn't go well," he said. "They offered me the job, but it's not what I expected." I felt a pang of disappointment. "What do you mean?" I asked. John sighed. "The job is in another city," he said. "They want me to relocate." I felt a surge of surprise. I had never considered the possibility that John might have to move away. What would this mean for Rachel and the kids? What would it mean for our family? As I looked at John, I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He was torn between taking the job and providing for his family, and staying in the city and keeping his family together. I knew that this was a difficult decision, and I didn't envy John's position. But I also knew that we had to think about what was best for the family. "What do you think we should do?" I asked John, trying to keep my voice neutral. John shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "I need to talk to Rachel and the kids." I nodded. "Okay," I said. "Let's talk about it as a family." As we sat down to discuss the pros and cons of the job offer, I couldn't help but feel a sense of uncertainty. What would the future hold for our family? Would we be able to stay together, or would we have to make sacrifices for the sake of John's career? As we talked, I realized that there was no easy answer. But I also knew that we would face whatever challenges came our way, together, as a family. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing content. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced favoritism like this? I'd love to hear your stories. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Let me know if you'd like it adjusted to fit your style.